So, one of the things about psychology, okay, most of the time, psychologists are actually pretty sane. That gives them kind of a disadvantage to figuring out what crazy people are thinking, okay? They do their best to place themselves in their shoes. This is kind of why I put that Wyoming incident video up there, because essentially the catatonic schizophrenia video that I put up there has a person that I envision his internal psyche somewhat being represented as like fuzzy, like that video, and then the like weird faces and shit being like that, and then just cutting off, and then his whole psyche just like shutting down and then coming back on, kind of stuff. Okay, and that's kind of like what I envision that guy's psyche being like. Right, so that's somewhat of like, if you see the video and then you see that guy, you might start to realize that in ways it might represent what goes on internally in his brain. You see, he like stops and has like half sentences, and then that video kind of stops, has just like a couple of phrases, and then stops and goes back to the kind of like the TV station shutting down for the night stuff. And then so his psyche, I envision being like that. And so that is where I also like I also posted a video of a woman that was doing med circle or something like that. And like she's like a top level psychologist or whatever. And that she talks about the normativeness of essentially the world accepts a lot more sociopathic behavior as normative nowadays, and that nowadays the online communities, essentially most people are somewhat kept away from really seeing what normative behavior is on dark web. And so a lot of the things that I document is in my research is a lot of the psychology of the normative behavior of sociopathic kind of tendencies that everybody accepts as just a normal idea. Like the whole idea is that there's a real tech movement of people really getting speakers, and it's completely normative to just be pissed off at somebody and to be torturing them in speakers. That's like a normative thing, day to day. Anybody in the dark web, pretty much, is like, it's just these cops will sit around acting like it would be okay, all that stuff. And so that's the kind of normative behavior that I attempt to document. Another thing is that I posted a video that was using like catatonic schizophrenia, that I was basically, these cops act like psychologists sometimes on dark web, and they have like completely ass backwards theoretics about that stuff. And so, yeah, the whole idea is that those people, they attempted their like little weird dark web idea about me in the past, and so yeah, I don't like that. Okay, so I made a huge mockery of that. One of the things about making huge mockeries about little stupid pedophile cops is that then they have like these like little weird secret hacker ways where they essentially have like little groups of Christians and Mormon kids and shit that'll go around commenting. And see, the whole idea is that somebody commented on that video, and that whether that person is doing that or not, a lot of times I attempt to fish out if they're being one of those like online cop group kind of, they just have these cop groups with Christians and shit. Okay, and so I attempt to fish by asking questions of them because it's part of my research, and that I attempt to entice them into commenting on the stuff, and that I use somewhat of like I use like a boilerplate kind of data mine methodology of assumption, and that's why I ask questions and stuff. So the person commented on how that video, that essentially is like, it's kind of, it's, they probably have newer catatonic schizophrenia kind of videos, but that is basically probably what has been used in the past as an educational video. And then he said, this person said that person was a paid actor, and then he claimed that it's just known. And that's what I really wonder, because a lot of times they have these like little weird internal worlds on dark web that they're off in like a whole different dark web like thought process, that essentially what I put was that cops were stupid. And then that person, this is what I'm talking about. I researched their like weird reasonings for doing stuff. And see, this is the stuff. This is the stuff that's difficult for psychologists to understand, because nobody can actually, they won't ever explain, because they know it's crazy, and they won't ever explain it. And so I research what their little stupid reasonings are sometimes for this type of stuff. So in my research, essentially they have like some theory that whoever the like voyeur fishing cop group is, essentially I probably was like smarter than them in that video or something. This is what happens, yeah. And that then they have their like smartest, most pedophile like Christian or Mormon kid or something be saying that, well, that's a paid actor, it's just known. And then it's like, then inside of their little stupid little hacker groups and shit, then the cops are able to reestablish intellectual authority, and that they literally are like in a complete alternate reality and shit. And so I suspect sometimes, that's why I ask questions like that, I suspect sometimes that they're a part of that type of stuff, and that the little innocent, see, they do like a pedophile like society where it's be like the little children or something. And so that's kind of where they just do. They do weird semantic pedophile stuff. It's like even me like putting up my hand right now, that video that I like posted and shit. They'll be sitting in the dark web going, look at how his hand was there. He must be a kid. I mean, this is like what they sit around voyeuring people, and then having like these weird discussions and shit. And so a lot of times I find it extremely humorous, because they essentially don't understand how fucking stupid they fucking look everywhere. And that they get like they get like confident about their like completely like dumb fucking explanations to everything. And that then essentially nowadays the hackers, they like to basically like broadcast how fucking stupid those little groups are. And so from that, I was somewhat able to research some of these more fine-tuned, like, I would call them a psychop or a gaslight, and then I attempt to figure out what like psychologists would need to do to deprogram that stuff. See, what I know about the crazy people is that a lot of times they suffer from gaslightings and psychops, and that then that has them going in a whole skewed tangent of reality and stuff. And that if you can isolate these little fine-tuned ideas that they think are academic and shit, once you break those down, a lot of times, if they still, like, if they refuse to accept it, then you'll know that they really suffer from a serious, some sort of serious mental health psychosis of some sort. And that's kind of like where if they refuse to deprogram to their psychopt alternate realities and shit, and this is prevalent all over the dark web nowadays, and that the prevalence of people like being on dark web and being under forms of gaslights and psychops is increasing, and that most of those people live in like a, it's kind of like this where the introvertedness to people doing dark web is kind of what prevents psychology from understanding, because basically they go into dark web and that is where they live in a little introverted world that they don't ever tell anybody about, okay? And so this is where the effectiveness of mental health is kind of inhibited based on a lot of their abilities to understand what these little fucking weird alternate reality issues they suffer from. And so if you're able to pinpoint one, and if you're able to build a logical, rational deprogramming, a lot of times it'll just crack, and that a lot of their whole reasonings for doing stuff sometimes are built around these gaslights and shit, and that's like what their whole like online introverted world is based around. And then once you deprogram them, then essentially it takes away a real logical reason to be doing that stuff, whatever it is. And that then, since their whole life is kind of engulfed on that kind of dark web introverted world, once you deprogram them, they'll essentially just refuse to accept reality. People that refuse to accept reality are the ones that when presented, they'll present themselves as logical. They'll comprehend things as rational, in a rational way. And that when you present a deprogramming, they will refuse to accept. And that from that's how you'll know that they're suffering from a massive psychosis. And so, one of the things that I like to do is I like to see the ways that you can avoid certain aspects to that. See, when religious people don't get their argument to work, well then they just say that it's faith or something. Right, so the approach in mental health is to essentially focus on this stuff. And that then abstract art doesn't really mean a fucking thing. Doesn't. See, like this stuff doesn't mean anything. This is my humorous fuck you to what is an older theoretical idea. It's part of my art. It's part of it, okay? Because when I stumbled upon psychology still using that dumb idea, I just couldn't help myself, okay? I suffer from a facetiousness also. Because it's just so fucking dumb. See, it's so fucking dumb that I just couldn't help myself. See, art doesn't mean anything. And so that's what I'm getting at. These blocks become very useful in ways when you utilize the theme aspects. So the reality is that to question their religion or art, that stuff is kind of where in psychology you just basically you focus on logic and ethics and pathos, and when it comes to when it comes to being an alt-right fucking QAnon and conservative or something, that stuff falls into their religion. But the whole idea is that you can correct them on abiding by the laws, and if they refuse to accept that based on being a Republican or something, then you'll know that if they're breaking laws and essentially adhering to a revolutionary idea kind of stuff, you can correct them in that if they still believe or something, that's when they're. But see, the reality is that you can, if they won't be, what you deprogram is their law breaking stuff or their I guess in the government block it would be like the Bill of Rights. See, if they believe that Democrats shouldn't be able to have guns or something, stuff like that. I mean that's kind of the stuff that if they strictly still adhere to that stupid idea, it's basically this block is like you can pretty much avoid most of the politics and focus on the Bill of Rights that everybody gets in the world. And so they'll have weird ideas about like not being a Christian and not getting the Bill of Rights because of that. And that stuff, if they strictly adhere to that, you'll know that they suffer even after a deprogramming of that idea. You'll know that they basically suffer from a more advanced mental health disorder. And so economics, that kind of stuff is like if they're espousing fascism or something like that, it's like socialism is still technically an acceptable idea. It is. So the reality is that fascism isn't. And so that is like if you pinpoint any of their QN in like fascism or something, that if they still think that breaking laws as long as it makes money kind of stuff, it's like they have these whole groups online that as long as it makes money, then QAnons can like do illegal stuff or something. See, that's the kind of shit. That's the fascism ideas. And so then if they attempt to build like an India caste society that isn't socially acceptable in the United States, all men are created equal. And so then, if they believe that being some free or Mormon gives them a reason to break laws and shit, see, and as you start to pinpoint all of this stuff, then if they believe that they have demons or demons instead of like schizophrenia and shit like that, that is like, and then if they think that creation is, see, that's the kind of stuff that you just avoid that and go, oh, that's what you believe in. And that I pretty much developed like a whole potential scientific correction to creationism that could potentially fit into with all evolutionary science. But that's what I do, to be facetious. I'm a genius. But if they believe, see, if this is the idea, is that a lot of these people present themselves as being smart, seemingly smart, and then if you know anything about the scientific method, a lot of these weird conservatives that seem smart will basically be deviating from the scientific method. And so that's kind of what you would focus on in a deprogramming in that way. But I mean, this is where, this would be like, real extensive psychological analysis or psychoanalyzation, okay? And so the real purpose of psychoanalyzation is literally to locate gaslights or psychops and to build deprogrammings. And I mean, that's the real purpose. So the whole idea is that since everybody's just used to kind of being forced to go to mental health, nobody really puts forth any effort to be giving the mental health psychologists the needed information. Because in lots of ways, a psychologist is just basically supposed to deprogram people to gaslights in a more concise way. See, the diagnosis stuff, sure, that's basically what most psychology is now turned into. But there is a real world that after the diagnosis, they're supposed to attempt to do a psychoanalyzation that highlights and pinpoints all of their gaslights. And then you're supposed to deprogram them. So that's why I say that most of the ineptness of mental health and psychology comes from the inability of getting people to talk about their little weird, crazy shit. Everybody's afraid of going to a psych unit. And see, the more you talk about your craziness, and the more the psychologist goes, well, that's actually crazy. And then if you accept what they say, then you won't end up in a fucking psych unit. That's how it works. See, the more you talk about emotions, the more you talk about what you think is crazy and that you don't want anybody to know about and shit. That's the stuff that a psychologist is there to help you with. And that if you tell them what you believe, if you say, oh, I've seen illusions or something like that, the more you just tell them the truth. And then just, all you have to do is, you just say, this is what I thought, this is what I think. What is it? That. They don't send people to psych units for that. If, you know, whatever course of action, they'll want to figure that out too. Whatever course of action led to the crazy thought process or belief or whatever led to that is the gaslights. And so the moment and it's really easy if an elite psychologist goes, this is what the logical, rational kind of explanation. You think that you can torture people in speakers on dark web? You can't. And then if they accept that, okay, then they are working towards being more sane. I mean, that would be an example. And then a lot of times if you frame it, see, they won't believe that forcing sound into some hacker's speaker as being torture, because they usually are like from a religious community that do that stuff, and that they know that the term torture is like a sin. And that if you frame it in its very concise explanation, to force sound into somebody else's hacker speaker is torture. And that then if like they have some sort of ability to comprehend like academics, you can literally look at the law, capital offense law of torture, and then you can potentially show them how it's illegal. And then there might be some online videos of the sound torturing method of like a POW or something. And that starts to build what is a very real deprogramming to that type of behavior. And then if they still refuse, then those people suffer from ultimate fucking psychosis problems. See, if they start justifying and shit constantly, those people are crazy as fuck. And so that's like where there's whole groups that they used to torture Masons. Masons used to get special like hearing aids when they would get old that would have the ability of having a radio broadcast. They would have a private radio, and it would have a radio receiver, like a regular radio, like on in your car. They would have a private version of that, that then people would start putting, they would they would essentially broadcast into it, and then everybody would call them schizos and shit. That's what it is in the past. So the whole idea is that they still, satanic S&M clubbers, use the theory of speaker being schizo, because that's what they used to do when Mason lodges would figure out what their little satanic little cop groups would be doing. And then they would discuss that stuff in ways out of like a microphone in a Mason lodge that would tell other Masons with the hearing aids that had the special radio receiver in it. And then cops would find out, and then cops would have essentially a similar, like, they would have a similar radio frequency out of their police stations, and then they would turn down the radio broadcast, and then they would start fucking with people in those hearing aids. And then when old Masons would march on into like a police station or something, they would say, these people are fucking putting shit in my fucking hearing aid and shit, and then everybody would call them a schizo. And then it would cause the fucking Mason to fucking psychologically overload. And you see that that's called the Nazi pedocuck method. And that people that do that are in a satanic S&M. And that is where anybody that says that denies this hacker speaker shit and calls the person a schizo or crazy or something, thus there's such a high probability of literally labeling them a Satanist. It gets that easy